this morning, and we're so pleased to have everyone with us and have our Secretary of the Department of Agriculture with us, Secretary Vilsack. Welcome. And in addition to thanking you for being here today, I want to thank you and your 100,000 staff members who undertake every day to support American farmers, small towns, and consumers alike, and all your work to protect our food system, both locally and globally. You've been very busy on a number of fronts, making sure WIC moms can get baby formula amid a national shortage. I appreciate how quickly, once you were notified, you went into gear, and I also want to thank Senator Bozeman and the whole committee for us working together on a bipartisan basis to take action that was important for our committee to do last week. You've been creating more opportunities for rural small businesses and strengthening opportunities for American farmers both at home and abroad, mobilizing USDA to respond to the climate crisis, and equipping our supply chain to better withstand shocks like the pandemic and Putin's war on Ukraine. Your work reflects the range of challenges facing our farmers, families, and rural communities right now. During the pandemic, we saw how highly concentrated food supply chains left both farmers and consumers vulnerable. Essential workers were on the front lines without adequate protection. Farmers had no choice but to destroy the crops and livestock they could no longer sell. And millions of families did not have enough to eat. The previous administration gravely mismanaged USDA's ability to address any of these crises. Under your leadership, USDA has implemented the historic investments in the American Rescue Plan and the Consolidated Appropriations Act to support local and regional businesses and get the supply chain moving again. And after 4 years of disastrous trade policies, putting our farmers back on solid ground with our trading partners has been no small task. This has been even more critical as Putin's unprovoked war in Ukraine strains our global supply chain, as we know, putting the food security of millions in peril and causing prices for everything from diesel fuel to fertilizer to skyrocket. While Congress and the USDA have responded quickly with humanitarian aid and resources to grow domestic production, we know there's more we can do together. USDA is also helping to empower small towns and rural communities through the bipartisan infrastructure law. USDA has expanded high-speed internet and is investing in roads and bridges that keep Main Street moving. Mr. Secretary, I hope you can expand upon how these investments will increase the quality of life for millions of people who live in rural America. But we won't have a home for future generations if we don't tackle the climate crisis. Wildfires and droughts out west, early frosts and thaws in Michigan, and torrential flooding in the plains all pose great risk to our ability to produce and distribute food. That's costing us, quite literally. The good news is that while farmers and foresters are directly affected by the climate crisis, they are also uniquely positioned to address it, as you know. Farmers are eager to partner with USDA on cutting-edge research and innovation to increase yields, to participate in USDA conservation practices to protect the soil, and to invest in climate-friendly practices that are profitable and practical for farmers. Our Growing Climate Solutions Act that we've done together, for example, goes hand in hand with the work USDA is doing to help farmers lead on the climate crisis. Finally, all of us can agree that we want to make sure we have a rural economy that helps small towns thrive, gives producers a good return on all of their hard work, and keeps food on our tables. So again, welcome to the committee, Secretary Vilsack, and I will now turn to my ranking member, Senator Bozeman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and we appreciate having Secretary Vilsack back at the committee. Before I turn to today's hearing, I would like to congratulate the chairwoman for hosting a very successful hearing in April on the campus of Michigan State University. This was the kickoff to the 2023 Farm Bill process. I enjoyed learning more about the issues that are important to Michigan's agriculture producers and rural communities. I share many of the goals for our next Farm Bill that were highlighted by our witnesses. It's amazing as you get out whether it's in Arkansas or throughout the country, farmers really do have so much in common and just share the problems that they're facing. I'm delighted that the chairwoman will be joining me in Arkansas next month for our second field hearing. The committee will formally notice the hearing later today, but I'm pleased to share with the committee that we'll be holding our next field hearing in Jonesboro, Arkansas on June 17th. I'm excited to share the views of Arkansas's hardworking farm families with the chairwoman and my colleagues on the committee. This is an unprecedented time for agriculture. As we come out of a global pandemic, we confront a war in the breadbasket of Europe, which has choked off a sizable portion of the world's grain and oilseed production. Global food insecurity has become acute. My good friend David Beasley, the head of the World Food Program, recently told me he is now faced with the decision to take food from hungry people in order to give it to starving people. While U.S. producers are willing to help fill the gap, our farmers and ranchers face declining farm incomes and steeply higher input costs. And I've got some examples of that, and we'll put those in for the record. But USDA can play a constructive role to help American farmers and ranchers meet the challenges both here and at home globally. Also, I applaud the nomination of Alexis Taylor to serve as the Undersecretary of Agriculture for Trade and Foreign Agriculture Affairs. America desperately needs some laser focus on working with our partners and competitors across the globe for the benefit of U.S. agriculture at this critical moment. I would encourage USDA to stretch itself and fellow agencies to make the tough decisions necessary that will help bring down food prices and enhance global food security. Food prices will decrease when the costs from the farm to the fork go down. The answer is more supply, more oil and gas development for lower energy prices, more participation in the labor market, more land in production, and more certainty for our farmers and ranchers. Until the administration starts to focus on the core issues that are driving record food costs, there will be no relief and American families will continue to suffer. I will keep making that case to the administration and my colleagues and encourage them to work with us to help create an environment where those factors start trending in the right direction and prices start to come down. I appreciate the announcement from the USDA made this morning that will allow some additional flexibilities for those with expiring CRP contracts. I think it's a great step in the right direction, but I believe that we can do more. One suggestion is look to the past. In the 2014 Farm Bill, landowners enrolled in the Conservation Reserve Program were given an opportunity to end their contracts early without penalty. We should give serious consideration to this penalty-free incentive again until grain production returns to normal. I believe this flexibility would allow potentially millions of acres to return to food production. The world cannot afford for prime farmland to lie fallow. Second, and this is more focused on EPA than USDA, I believe that there should be a 2-year pause on any regulatory changes to currently approved crop protection tools. Producers need the regulatory predictability to plan for the future, and the companies that produce these inputs need the regulatory certainty to bring those tools to the market. American agriculture can meet this unprecedented moment. The federal government should ensure it's not in the way. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much.
Looking forward to the hearing.
I am very much looking forward to coming back to Arkansas, so I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much. Again, I want to welcome Secretary Vilsack back to the committee. My first turn as chair from 2011 to 2014 coincided with his first term at the USDA. As Secretary for Agriculture under President Obama, Secretary Vilsack put Americans back to work by investing in the rural economy, advocating for American producers, and he helped them see record crop prices and farm exports and made sure Americans had access to safe and nutritious food. Prior to his current term as secretary, he served as the CEO and president of the U.S. Dairy Export Council. Secretary Vilsack was the 40th governor of Iowa, a former member of the Iowa State Senate, and a former mayor of his hometown of Mount Pleasant. So thank you, Senator Vilsack. It's a pleasure to have you before the committee, and we look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and appreciate the invitation from you and the ranking member for the opportunity to be in front of this committee. I think it would be helpful if I could highlight 3 recent announcements from the department in my opening statement, and then I'll obviously be glad to respond to questions that the committee has. As we all know, we're dealing with a situation involving infant formula, and thanks to the quick action of Congress, you all have provided the Department of Agriculture additional authority in terms of WIC that will allow us to work with those who produce formula in this country to create more supply. We just sent a letter to all of the state health commissioners, as well as to Gerber, Nestle, and Mead Johnson, indicating our willingness to work with them to provide waivers so that they can continue to expand contract brand options in terms of the WIC state agencies allow the use of contract brand alternatives that were not previously authorized, as well as temporarily allowing them to use non-contract products to be substituted. We will pay the rebates in the WIC budget itself, so the companies will not be at risk financially for these substitutions. I think it will help assist in expanding access to product. We also filed today in an effort to try to create more new and better markets for our farmers, the beginning of a process on our Packers and Stockyards Act. We start with the poultry tournament rule. There are 2 components to what we have disclosed today. The first is an effort to try to create greater transparency between integrators and producers, providing additional information to the producer before they enter into contracts. It's modeled after the FTC franchisee disclosure efforts, and it's really designed to help producers be able to better value the costs and risks that they're taking in entering into a contract with an integrator. It allows them to manage that risk by knowing a bit more about who they're doing business with. We're requesting that the integrators provide information concerning the number of placements and the stock density, a history of payments under prior tournaments so that folks can understand and appreciate where they might be in the process, a bit of information about the background of the integrator, whether they've been in bankruptcy at any point in time, whether they're involved in litigation, and the ability of producers to be able to share that information with their financial advisors and those who are providing them legal assistance so that they're in the best possible position to understand and appreciate the risk. There will be an exemption for very small live poultry dealers in this proposal. In addition, we also have provided additional disclosures concerning the inputs that a farmer is receiving, both at the time of placement and at the time of settlement. We want the farmer to be able to understand the breed, the facility that was breeding the stock that they're being provided, the sex, the flock age, health issues that may have cropped up, and essentially at the time of settlement, understanding the distribution of inputs, the housing specifications, feed disruptions that may have impacted and affected the rankings. All of this is designed to avoid deception and to provide, again, farmers with the ability to understand precisely what they're getting into. 60-day comment period. We believe from our analysis that the benefits of transparency and additional disclosure exceed the costs. We will also be filing a study that was done on competition in the retail and seed area. We also are announcing today a $200 million effort to try to help existing meat and poultry facilities. It's an intermediary loan program. It's going to provide grants to co-ops, other nonprofit organizations, public agencies, to create revolving loan funds to assist and help those facilities to remain in business. We're announcing as well a $25 million effort to try to expand workforce through our NIFA programs. We think this is an opportunity to expand capacity. This goes along with the additional opportunities that we announced in terms of additional processing capacity. We received 263 applications for the $150 million grants that are available. It totals about $895 million of interest. 46 states, 111 beef applications, 33 poultry applications, 69 pork applications, 25 lamb, and 14 goat. The projected cost of all these projects is roughly $5 billion, so there's obviously great interest in this program. And I might say in my remaining time, we also saw great interest in the climate smart agriculture and Forestry Product Partnership Initiative. We received 450 applications, $18 billion in requests from all 50 states, a diverse pool of applicants, nonprofits, cooperatives, for-profit organizations, government entities, commodity groups, forest groups, tribes, universities, small and large corporations, a wide range of commodities involved. This is the first of two application deadlines. June 10th is our small application deadline. About $8 billion of additional leverage. So there's a tremendous interest in this program as well. Be happy to respond to questions from the committee. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. And I know that Leader McConnell has to go to the floor to help open the floor. So who says bipartisanship is dead? I'm going to defer to Senator McConnell. And please go forward with your questions, and we'll continue. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Senator Bozeman, I'm here today, Mr. Secretary, because I've got a particular problem that I'm trying to address, but it's ultimately going to come down to you. Here's what happened. Last December, we got hit by the biggest tornado we've ever had. It actually ended up being on the ground for over 200 miles. It hit and largely destroyed the town of Mayfield, which is the biggest grain storage facility in our state, completely wiped out. So, look, I want to thank you for what you all have already done to help on numerous occasions as we try to recover. But as part of the destruction, with its grain storage infrastructure gone in western Kentucky, not only do we lose millions of bushels of storage, we've got a problem that has to be fixed, or we're basically out of business this year. So what I did was put a provision in the appropriations bill that asks you to identify funding sources that we can address pretty quickly to not completely lose our ability to have storage for this year's crop. So I don't know whether you're already familiar with this or not, but I wonder if you have any awareness of it, and if you could give me any assurance that maybe we can address this issue by your decision shortly.
Senator, I am aware. I know that our staff has been in touch with the Farm Bureau down in your state, as well as your own staff. I understand that there is an idea for a series of pop-up storage facilities there. I think there are some concerns about precisely how cumbersome that particular solution might be, but we are very committed to working as expeditiously as possible to provide an alternative and to provide the resources that will allow your farmers to have storage. Totally understand and appreciate the challenges that this presents, and we are committed to trying to get it resolved as quickly as possible.
Well, I really appreciate it. It's an emergency. The only other question I would ask, I suppose anybody at the table could also ask, and that is the this inflation issue that we're all hammered with. Amounts to well over $5,000 of increased costs annually, including $780 in additional costs for food. In a rural state like mine, and a lot of the members of this committee have similar states, small business and family farms are getting hit at both ends. And every single conversation I've had with farmers in the last year, the burden of increased input costs has been right in the forefront. One recent study from Texas A&M estimated that despite higher commodity prices, farm profits will drop by nearly 60% in 2022 due to these higher input costs. Since January of 2021, animal feed has increased by 43%, diesel fuel 115%, natural gas 202%, fertilizer 220%. Agencies like EPA, Interior, and others seem bent on driving these costs up even further. Have you worked with your colleagues across the administration to inform them how this regulatory onslaught is contributing to the burdens the farmers already have?
Senator, our focus at USDA is to try to figure out ways in which we can provide assistance and help on the number of issues that you've raised. First of all, we are looking at ways in which we can increase productive land going into production. Obviously, as Senator Bozeman indicated, supply does have a tendency, if you expand it, it has a tendency to help bring costs down and potentially increase income. Secondly, in terms of the fertilizer, there are a number of things that we're doing. We are working with farmers to make sure that they are fully aligned with the right application, the right time, the right location, the right amount. We have also provided a new risk management tool that encourages split application of nitrogen to reduce the cost to farmers with picking up the loss of productivity that may occur if they are unable to fertilize twice in a year. We also have allocated $500 million towards looking at a broad array of options in terms of how we might be able to expand fertilizer capacity in this country and not be as reliant and as reliant as we have been on outside sources for fertilizer. And we're also looking at a number of strategies in terms of ways in which we can better utilize precision agriculture to ensure that we are using fertilizer in the appropriate time and appropriate amount. So there's a series of things that we're doing. We're also, and I would only finish by saying, part of our responsibility is also to provide help and assistance to the families that, as you mentioned, are struggling. That's the reason why it's important to get the SNAP program where it is. It's important to continue to promote the WIC bonus buy that we have in our budget. It's appropriate to take a look at ways in which we can help our schools deal with the consequences of all of this. That's why we asked for a continuation for one more year of universal free school meals. We think that there are a number of ways in which we can provide help and assistance to families get through this difficult time.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much. First, let me just say, Mr. Secretary, talking about fertilizer and inputs and all the costs that have gone up, we hope in Michigan to be able to help with this. There's a new effort to have a potash facility created for, we know that part of the ingredients, a really important part that hasn't been produced in the United States. So we hope we're going to have more production of these materials in the United States so that we are less dependent on what's happening around the world. The climate crisis, I'd like to talk with you a little bit more about this. We know, I mean, whether it's what happened in Kentucky, whether it's what happened last weekend in northern Michigan in a small town, Gaylord, Michigan, which I don't ever remember having a tornado, and certainly not one that went through and wiped out a very important housing project, mobile home park and downtown small businesses and so on, and people are picking up the pieces for a long time. So we're seeing the climate crisis in severe weather and what carbon pollution has been doing for us. 100 years of carbon pollution right in our face right now. So I'm encouraged by the efforts that you are putting forth. And I know you said you've received a tremendous response to the Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities pilot project. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about what that means, and also how our efforts on Growing Climate Solutions Act, Senator Braun, Senator Bozeman, myself, others in the committee, putting together something that passed overwhelmingly in the Senate. Not too often you have 92 out of 100 votes, and the effort to create some integrity around these systems and transparency and expertise and so on. Wonder if you might speak to that as well, as how that effort, which is unfortunately hasn't moved yet in the House, but fortunately we're going to get this done and get it to you, and how it will help farmers as we look at the climate effort that we're all working on together.
Well, that act, Madam Chair, is extraordinarily important because it provides a vehicle through which we can provide the level of technical assistance that farmers and producers and ranchers need to be able to understand and appreciate climate smart practices. We've been providing technical assistance to both the House and the Senate Ag committees in an effort to try to find common ground. In terms of the Climate Smart Agriculture and Forestry Products Initiative, this is designed to essentially create opportunities for marketing of climate smart commodities. We think there's a value-added proposition. We think it's an opportunity to expand income for farmers, to be able to allow farmers to also qualify for ecosystem benefits. We're very, very pleased with the reaction from farmers and ranchers. We listened to them. They asked us to set up this pilot. They asked us to provide resources to enable farmers to aggregate their efforts. This is an effort that will result not only in adoption of climate-smart practices and an acceleration of those practices, but an opportunity to measure and verify and quantify the results from those practices that will allow us to better understand how to essentially establish the standards for climate-smart commodities. It's also a way in which we're enhancing the notion of partnerships and leverage. And finally, it's a chance for us to really understand, to be ahead of the game, for American agriculture to lead not just our own domestic effort, but internationally, to respond back and to push back a little bit on some of the other approaches to this that are occurring in other parts of the world that we think will jeopardize the ability to increase productivity. We think that there's an opportunity to increase productivity and be sustainable at the same time. This is part of an overall strategy that not only includes this initiative, but taking a look at 33 climate-smart practices and having our NRCS folks work collaboratively with farmers to adopt those practices. It's about renewable energy. It's about forestry and better forest management. It's about a workforce. It's about adaptation mitigation, and we're trying to sort of address this in a very comprehensive way.
Well, thank you so much. This is so critically important for all of us. And then finally, let me ask about urban agriculture. As you know, I authored several provisions in the 2018 Farm Bill, including the establishment of an Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovative Production, which we now have a new director of, which I'm appreciative of, and things are moving forward. And I wonder, when we talk about resiliency and we talk about community and we talk about access to food and so on, urban agriculture is a very important part of that. And I actually am very proud of the efforts in Michigan that have been going on across the state, really started with incredible leadership in Detroit. What specific actions is USDA taking to better serve the unique needs of urban producers? And can you describe the priorities for the new office?
Well, essentially, there are 17 cities that have been designated, 17 counties, if you will, and we're expanding that number this year, adding, there were 11 initially, and we're adding additional 6 new cities. In addition to having an office and in addition to having a presence, we're also providing grant money to promote innovative solutions in those urban settings, whether it's vertical agriculture or it's community gardens, across the board, additional resources for that purpose, also composting and making sure that we're also addressing the food loss issues. The exciting opportunity as well is to have FSA offices located in those cities. So it's an opportunity for those urban farmers to understand and appreciate all the range of programs that will be available to them. And we've also are working on a toolkit to refresh the toolkit on urban agriculture so that you'll have the opportunity to share with those who are interested in establishing an urban agricultural activity in their city. It's sort of a, here's how you do it. Here are all the issues that you can raise. Here are all the programs that are available to you.
Great, thank you so much. And we're going to go out of order one more time here because our distinguished chair of Judiciary Committee is going to have to chair a hearing. So Senator Durbin, we're going to turn it to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member. This is a rare appearance because we schedule the Senate Judiciary Committee at the same time as Agriculture, and it's difficult. Thanks to the remarkable cooperation of Senator Grassley, we got things done early this morning, and I've got a chance to visit here for just a moment. And I wanted to ask one very parochial but very important question on behalf of 8,000 people in the state of Illinois. So, Secretary Vilsack, you probably remember from your days of trekking through Iowa how important some of these senior activities are to our rural populations. For many of them, it's a chance to get together during the course of a day, and it really is the highlight of their day. Well, for over 25 years, Illinois has had a model where we have SNAP benefits available to these seniors, and they pool them in these senior living facilities, and 150 of them around the state each day for lunch. They get together for lunch. And this has been okay for more than 20 years, but just a few years ago, the department said, not okay anymore. So we said, what's the problem? They said, well, fraud and abuse. They did an investigation. There's no fraud and abuse. It's just the use of these SNAP benefits in a pooled situation to pay for their lunches. And so we have, thanks to the cooperation of both Senator Stabenow and Senator Bozeman, each year in the appropriation bill, extended the program so that they continue to pool these SNAP benefits for their lunches at the senior facilities. On behalf of the 8,000 seniors, I appeal to you. Can you fix this for us?
Senator, we're trying to work with the state to develop the framework of a pilot that would allow this problem to go away so you wouldn't have to deal with it each and every year in the appropriations process. I would also say that I think it's an invitation for us to take a look at ways in which the SNAP program can be more accessible and more meaningful. I think we have to be significantly flexible as we deal with an aging population in many of these states. So we are committed to working with the state of Illinois to try to figure out how to establish the pilot in a way that doesn't require you to have to go through this situation every year.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Ranking Member. Appreciate your opportunity.
Well, we're so glad you're a part of the committee, so thank you. Senator Bozeman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you again for being here with us today. Rice farmers and some of our specialty crop growers may lose hundreds of millions of dollars this year due to increased input cost. And unlike almost every other commodity, they have stagnant prices. They simply haven't increased while we've had this enormous increase, as we all know, with our input cost. I'm worried about the future of our domestic rice production infrastructure it supports, again, and concerned about our specialty crops. Will you commit to working with us to ensure that economic viability of our domestic rice producers and others like specialty crop growers who may be experiencing similar difficulties?
Senator, I hope all of your questions are this easy to answer. Yes.
Well, I hope all of your answers are like that, and we get a yes out of them. So thank you very much. Let me talk to you a little bit about the Conservation Reserve Program, and I think all of us appreciate the fact that you're being flexible in that regard, and that's a good thing. I don't think we really understand, and I know this committee, I think I can speak for Senator Stabenow, we're very concerned about what we don't want to do is get ourselves in a situation like baby formula with shortages. And I don't think we really understand yet, what's happening exactly, the difficulties in Ukraine, all of the stuff that's going on right now to really understand where we're going to be at. So I guess what I would ask you is in regard to allowing CRP contract holders to leave the program early, to open up even more acreage. This is something that's been done in the past. Can we just work really hard to get some good data to know, if we need to be doing some of those things, tinkering on the edges there, you have a little bit, but again, what we don't want is significant shortages perhaps, but also, again, looking at the inflation, what we project it going further. Americans now, and I just got through a primary campaign, I can tell you as well as anybody, people of Arkansas, people throughout the country are just getting strapped. All of their discretionary dollars are being eaten up by gasoline, food, rent, the list goes on and on.
Well, I'd say a couple of things. First of all, we have basically taken a look at the acres that are currently in that program. And many, if not most of those acres are really not very productive. I mean, it's not as if we're taking a significant amount of productive land out of production. We basically have been focusing on highly erodible areas that are not particularly productive. Having said that, we also trust farmers to make the right decision for their own operation. And in fact, farmers have actually made the decision to actually take about 1 million acres or so, maybe a little bit more than 1 million acres out of the program this year. We have not created additional incentives to try to encourage more sign-up. We're well below the cap in this program. And frankly, we've got two challenges here. We've got a global food security challenge today that you've addressed in part, but we also have a longer-term global food security challenge in terms of climate and the impact on production internationally long-term. And we're trying to make sure that we're paying attention to both of these. And I think we will provide additional flexibilities when and if it's necessary, and we have done that in the past with haying and grazing. And we'll continue to look for ways in which we can provide assistance. But right now, more than 1 million acres coming out of that program into production. We think that farmers can be trusted to make the right decisions. And they always have the right, as you know, to be able to leave the program whenever they so choose.
Thank you. I understand USDA plans to release a proposed rule to tighten nutrition standards this fall. I guess the question is, will USDA enforce those standards in schools? We've got a situation there where, again, they're fighting the inflation cost, labor cost, and then also just the price of these, because they are in a situation where many of these are specialty products that aren't made as much and not as profitable. Are you confident that schools will have access to food that will meet the USDA's new standards? And have we done any work in really looking at what that's going to do towards increasing cost and availability?
This is an interim rule, Senator. It's not a full application of the nutrition standards. It's a bridge, if you will, to a longer-term recommitment to the Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids standards. We obviously, at the time we proposed this, were hopeful, and I guess continue to be hopeful that the Congress finds a way to provide the resources to schools with universal free meals for another year, and the additional waiver authority that we had that will expire at the end of, I think, June of this year. In the meantime, if that does not happen, we have in the past and will continue to look for ways in which we can provide assistance to schools. We did $1 billion of additional financial assistance to schools. We provided additional resources for local and regional food purchases, which we strongly support in an effort to try to help schools manage through this difficult time. We're going to do everything we can to make it easier for these folks. They do heroic efforts and certainly did heroic efforts during the pandemic.
So we're not going to tighten the standards?
Well, the standards, there's an increase, but it's not a full-throated increase in terms of the whole grains standard. I think the sodium standard stays where it is. This is, as I say, it's a gradual effort to try to ultimately, over the next couple of years, get back to where we were prior to the pandemic.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And I also want to just echo how critical it is that we move forward to help our schools, both summer programs and the additional costs that they're experiencing, right? Supply chain breakdowns and so on. So we continue discussions on that, but it's critically important because I understand up to a third, according to your department, up to a third of the schools, if we are not able to do anything to help, may not be able to provide school meals in the school year, which is certainly not acceptable. So let me turn to Senator Bennett and then Senator Hoeven.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, let me just echo what you just said about schools, and I want to thank the ranking member, Senator Bozeman, for the work we've done together on school nutrition, school lunches. It's so important, and at this moment particularly. So thank you for raising that. Secretary Vilsack, thank you for being here, and thank you for coming to Colorado for the Joint Secretary's Wildfire Season briefing that we had last month. You learned there, and we all learned there, that the West is facing the worst drought in 1,200 years. Based on what we learned at the briefing, it's likely that this trend will continue, and Colorado could see an extremely active wildfire season. We've had the 3 worst wildfires in our state's history. Last year, or the year before, or 2 years ago, last year, we had the terrible Marshall Fire the day before New Year's Eve. These are people literally getting ready for New Year's in the middle of COVID, who more than 1,000 families in Boulder County burned out of their homes as a result of fire. We've got this year already is the first year, or the year when we've had the shortest season without significant fire. Every single day, Mr. Secretary, I get a briefing from my staff about a fire someplace that's starting in Colorado, and my state is still facing a funding shortfall of almost $150 million to recover from the mega fires that swept through Colorado in 2020. I wonder whether you could provide the committee an update at when you expect USDA to release additional resources so that Colorado can implement the critical recovery work before another severe wildfire season begins.
Senator, we announced the availability of a little over $1 billion focused on recovery efforts. I think the state of Colorado was allocated $79 million of that resource. We're going to continue to look for ways to provide assistance and help, in addition to Those resources, there will also be resources in terms of reforestation that will be available. There's also, as you well know, an effort to try to accelerate our hazardous fuel reduction efforts. There will be an effort to continue to support community resiliency. So there's a series of things that we are doing in Colorado and in the West. And with the resources that we now have, we're going to accelerate that as quickly as we possibly can.
I really want to thank you for your broad commitment on this issue, Mr. Secretary. This is poorly understood by, I think, politicians in the East, certainly, and we are in a crisis now. And this is, for the committee, this is where our watersheds are. You know, this is every single farmer and rancher in Colorado and who's downstream from these rivers that start in Colorado, which is a lot of farmers and ranchers in a lot of different states, are depending on us to figure out how to deal with the ravages of climate change and the complete lack of investment the federal government historically has made. I want to thank you again for the $5 billion that's in the infrastructure package. It's going to allow us to do some important work on the land here, but it's not enough, and as you said, Mr. Secretary, waiting to just fight fires is the most cost-ineffective way of dealing with this. $50,000 an acre versus $1,400 or $1,500 an acre. I wanted just to shift to one other thing because you were kind enough to. It's been just over a year since you and Senator Mike Crapo and representatives from producers and farm workers had a meeting to discuss ag labor issues. We talked about the urgency of addressing farm labor needs and providing some sort of pathway for those workers who have largely sustained this country's food supply throughout the pandemic. With both inflation, the crisis in Ukraine, I'm extremely worried that the H2a program is going to be unworkable for our farmers and other employers. We should be working to fix the H2a program so that the agriculture industry can have certainty with their labor. I want to say just how grateful I am to Senator Crapo for hanging in there on this issue. It's not easy for him to do it. And if there are others that want to join the effort, we'd certainly love to have you because we've made changes to the House version of the bill and we'd like to get it over the finish line here. I wonder if you could talk about, Mr. Secretary, what you're seeing and hearing from employers around the country on the need for H2a reform and what we stand to lose if we continue to perpetuate the system that we have.
Senator, it's my view that it's a crisis. It's a crisis that could result in a number of particularly small and mid-sized farming operations not being able to sustain activities, particularly in the dairy industry. There is a need for stability. There is a need for a fix. There is a need for courage, political courage to pass immigration reform. The Ag Modernization Act is a bill that both the industry and the labor has agreed upon, which should make it relatively simple to be for it. And it is I'll tell you, people are puzzled as to why this hasn't passed. When I travel and talk to farmers, they go, "We need to do something about labor. Why can't they get 60 votes in the Senate?" I don't have an answer for that.
Again, to my colleagues, any of you, anybody who would like to try to be part of getting this over the finish line here and helping, partner with me and Mike Crapo, we would deeply appreciate it. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your leadership. And I would just say this is the moment where we have better opportunity that I think than ever before. And frankly, I would call on everyone in the agriculture industry to lean in as they lean in on other issues that they are concerned about. And so if everybody leaned in like they lean in on tax policy, I think we could get this done.
Yeah, and I know my time is over, but the Secretary is absolutely right. This is something that the growers and labor have come together on. So let's try to get it done.
No reason to. If people want to do this, if the agricultural community wants to do this, we'll do it. We see their power when they really want to get something done. So I know they care. So I'm doing a call to everybody within earshot here that this is the moment to get it done. So thank you. Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, good to see you. Guess first time I want to bring up is Senator Klobuchar, Senator Hyde-Smith, myself, Senator, all of whom are on the Ag Committee, also Senator Kramer, and then House members, too, on a bipartisan basis have sent you a letter in regard to the end date on crop insurance. Because of excess moisture, North Dakota, Minnesota, some other states, our farmers are butting up against that end date, whereby if they don't have their crops in the ground, be it corn, soybeans, whatever it is, that then they suffer discounts on crop insurance, which then, of course, causes them to go to prevented plant. Well, because they become concerned about that discount. Well, obviously, at a time of food inflation, we want as many of them as possible planting a crop. And so the proposal to you is through CCC or one of our programs to actually offer to cover some of that discount so that they'll actually go ahead and try to get those crops in the ground, even though they're going past that crop insurance end date. And so I think it's something to look at because it would actually save the USDA money, save the government money, from the standpoint of you're not paying out more prevented plant, you're paying out less by covering that discount, and at the same time you get more crops in the ground to help with food inflation. So that's the proposal to you, but it's something you'd need to move on pretty quick if you're going to do something to help there, because obviously they're getting those crops in the ground now and they have to make those decisions.
Senator, is this the letter that was sent yesterday? Mm-hmm. Okay. I haven't had a chance to review it, and I'm happy to talk to our team about it. I think part of the challenge that we face whenever we get into this particular area is making sure that we don't compromise the relationship between the insurers and the producers in terms of the overall crop insurance program, that we don't essentially create a circumstance where the risk is difficult for the crop insurance folks to be able to calculate. But I'm happy to take a look at what you all have written, and we've, as I think we've exhibited in the past, we're more than happy to try to provide help and assistance where it makes sense.
Well, yeah, we appreciate that, and I did talk to members of your staff about it as well, and that's why we've pitched it in the format that we have, so that you're not dealing with your insurance contracts and you don't run into any of those issues. So that's specifically why we've structured it the way we have. Appreciate your help and support and work on the disaster assistance. That we call it WIP Plus, but you have called it ERP, Emergency Relief Program, and also the Emergency Livestock Relief Program. Under ERP, Phase 1 is out. Just a brief recap of how that's going and when you anticipate getting to Phase 2.
Well, on the crop side, there are roughly over 300,000 applications that are pre-filled that have gone out and are going out this week by Friday. All 300,000 will be in the hands of farmers. Pre-filled applications, so all they have to do is check a few boxes and sign it. There have already been a number of farmers that have come into the office and they've already received their checks. And I believe that it's a matter of days. Once you basically file your application, you receive the resources. So that's the first phase, and we would expect the second phase sometime this summer after we've gotten a better understanding of precisely who wasn't covered by NAP, who wasn't covered by crop insurance, who wasn't covered by the livestock forage program, so that we would be in a position to be able to define the universe of that second tranche. But we wanted to get resources out as quickly as we could, and I think we've been able to accomplish that.
Appreciate your work on that and on the Emergency Livestock Relief Program, which we're working with you on as well. My other question, though, relates to Livestock Indemnity Program, LIP program. You and I talked about, for those, where they suffer mortality due to these blizzards, is really in the smaller calves for the most part, that 250 pounds or less. We actually work with our FSA director out in North Dakota, Marcy Svenningson, who is doing a fine job. And one of the ideas we talked about was combining those two smallest weight categories in terms of the reimbursement rate as something that would really work. The 250 pounds and less doesn't work. It just doesn't compensate the rancher for what they lost there. If you actually combine the two bottom of the four tiers, it probably would work. That was an idea she put forward. I thought a very good one, and so I want to pose it to you as well.
Well, as you know, there were changes made in 2020 to create a new category, and we're certainly committed to taking a look at realigning the categories if it makes sense. Happy to do that. I would say, just as a general proposition, the questions you're asking, Senator, I think raise my opportunity to say, when you're looking at Farm Bill, I tell you, this notion of disaster assistance, the notion of helping farmers through difficult times because of climate-related circumstances, There has got to be a real thought behind this in terms of the flexibility, in terms of the capacity to adjust depending upon conditions, because I think we're facing a much different set of circumstances than we have in the past relative to disaster. And I think your questions basically underscore that.
Right, and we've worked in that way to try to develop these programs, be it WIP Plus or what we do with some of the livestock programs, with the idea that we'll go into the Farm Bill and address them as part of the Farm Bill.
But it's important to understand the regional differences and the crop and the commodity differences.
Absolutely. Absolutely, right on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe we have Senator Gillibrand with us virtually, and then next will be Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. The recent mass shooting in a grocery store in Buffalo's East Side left an entire community without access to fresh and nutritious food. The incident has exacerbated the food desert that already exists there. Buffalo's not the exception, however, but more of the rule. Throughout many counties and cities across my state, there are food deserts. Sadly, this is an issue that plagues the entire country and not just New York State. Secretary Vilsack, what is the USDA doing to support communities that are situated in food deserts? And what are the existing resources currently available for communities living in food deserts?
Senator, we are administering the Healthy Food Financing Initiative, which is providing resources to communities to address the issue of food deserts. I intend to give a fairly significant speech next week at Georgetown, laying out some additional support for local and regional food systems, and the Healthy Food Financing Initiative will be part of the announcements that we'll make in that speech. We have resources under the American Rescue Plan that we're going to dedicate to try to provide some additional assistance. And in fact, I think one of the potential grants is actually in the area in Buffalo that you mentioned.
Thank you. The Biden administration's focus on creating economic opportunity in rural America has been very positive. USDA's rural development mission is focused on helping improve the economy and quality of life in rural America and will be centrally engaged in this effort. My concern is whether the USDA and its rural development efforts have the infrastructure and staffing to meet the increased workload to provide the needed resources to rural communities. What can we do to help improve outreach to our rural communities?
Senator, I really appreciate that question, because the answer is we don't have adequate staff. It's one of the reasons why we've requested in the President's FY23 budget additional resources to hire roughly 450 additional people in the rural development area. And I will tell you, there's tremendous demand. Just to give you a sense of this, our business and industry loan program is basically out of money. There's so much activity and so much opportunity that's being created in rural places that those resources have been utilized, and we still have obviously several more months left in the fiscal year. So we're going to have to transfer resources to make sure that we can meet the demand. So it is an issue, and we hope that as Congress passes the budget that they pay attention to this issue of personnel.
Thank you. With the cost of food increasing, school cafeterias will be stretched to provide affordable, nutritious meals. The enhanced pandemic relief funding for school reimbursement programs ends with the 2022 school year, which will compound this problem. How can we assure that the USDA's National School Lunch Program will provide adequate funding for our students to receive nutritious meals for the 2022 to 23 school year?
Continue to have hope and faith and trust in the Congress to basically see the wisdom of continuing the universal free meal program for another year. If that does not happen, then we will take a look at what we've done in the past, which is to provide additional resources, which obviously are not as significant and not as effective as the universal free meal. You're going to see a 40% reduction in school budgets as a result of the ending of the pandemic assistance efforts. And that's the reason why we've asked for an additional year.
Well, I will support that effort. When you came back to USDA, there were three major organic rulemakings pending. The origin of livestock rule, which was finalized recently, the organic livestock and poultry standards rule, which is at the OMB right now as a proposed rule, and the strengthening organic enforcement rule. This important rule is the most significant revision to organic standards since the publication of the original organic rule in 2001. In 2001. It will give the National Organic Program some more enforcement tools and responsibilities to continue to strengthen the integrity of the organic label and the organic supply chain. The 2018 Farm Bill laid out parameters for this new rulemaking and required rulemaking to be completed by December 2019. Comment period ended on the proposed SOE rule in October 2020. What is the update on this final rule, and will you prioritize its promulgation?
Senator, we expect that all three of those rules will be out by the end of the year.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you very much. Senator Ernst.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, Secretary Vilsack, for being with us today. It's always good to see you. It has been a while since you've been in front of the committee, and there's just been so much happening across the front of agriculture, and you've heard a number of those issues coming from my colleagues. Right now, you know, our farmers are hurting, and there's a multifaceted crisis happening across the nation's ag community. There's a tidal wave of supply chain issues preventing our farmers from even getting the parts they need during the spring planting season. Farmers are paying more for fertilizer and other inputs, and they are really worried about the availability of them next year as well. With the sharp spike in a number of these input prices, then of course we have the rise of inflation. The food that is actually grown is costing Iowa consumers significantly more. We've seen an 11% increase in food costs since January of 2021. And at the same time, if we compare and contrast this, the administration has been pushing a pretty radical goal to conserve 30% of the U.S. land and water by 2030. And the scope of this 30 by 30 initiative is expansive. We've tried to do a dive into it, but it's littered with a lot of different buzzwords, but has very little when it comes to actual details of how this will be accomplished. One of the things that we looked for was an actual definition for conservation or what lands would be included. And so if we can dive into a few of those issues. I had this issue raised by an Iowan at one of my town halls just recently. He had a concern about the 30 by 30 initiative. And his concern was that it would be used as a method to undermine private property rights and lock up more land. There are also concerns within the recreational fishing and hunting communities that it will be used as a means to arbitrarily restrict land access for those types of activities. Can you commit to me here today that the 30 by 30 initiative will not be used to undermine private property rights or to lock up land used for recreational fishing and hunting?
Senator, I'd be happy to commit to the fact that private property rights will be respected in connection with any activities relative to conservation. That this is voluntary, it's conservation-oriented, it's farmer-led. It's basically utilizing the conservation programs that you and I have been supportive of during our entire public careers. That's what this is. And we're going to continue to look for ways in which we can provide assistance and help to expand the ability of farmers and ranchers to utilize conservation tools.
Will we get additional details on how this is going to be accomplished? We have not been able to locate specifics on the initiative.
Well, I think the details that you're going to get are the development of an atlas that is essentially going to keep track of the activities of farmers, ranchers, and producers relative to conservation. So, for example, we recently, Robert Bonnie was out in Wyoming recently announcing a corridor initiative to a migratory corridor that's going to be protected. It's a partnership between the state of Wyoming, a number of those conservation hunting and angler groups to create a conservation corridor. Resources provided by the USDA, state resources, combining, leveraging, creating an opportunity for assistance. It's that type of program that I think it's collaborative, it's farmer-led, it's rancher-led, and I think we're going to continue to emphasize the fact it's voluntary and it's by all means going to respect private property rights.
And will they also maintain the rights of those hunters and fishers to engage in those types of recreational activities then?
Part of the reason we're doing this is basically to expand opportunities for hunting and fishing because we understand and appreciate the important role that plays in a rural economy.
Okay, I do appreciate that. Iowa farmers are really working hard right now to raise the crops and the livestock that are feeding our nation and the world, and they're being hit hard by inflation and supply chain challenges. You're the co-chair of the President's Supply Chain Disruption Task Force. What actions has the task force taken to help lower prices and ensure supply today of those necessary inputs for farmers during this growing season and for next year?
Well, we have been working in terms of our ports to increase hours of operation. We are providing opportunities for pop-up facilities that basically take some of the pressure and congestion off of the ports. Our Department of Labor is working on expanding apprenticeships to be able to put folks behind the wheel of trucks that are necessary. We've worked with the Surface Transportation Board to encourage our rail system to basically make the investments necessary to have a more resilient system. As you know, the Strategic Oil Reserve has been tapped. We've obviously provided for summer utilization of E15. And there are ways in which we, as I alluded to earlier, ways in which we are at the Department of Agriculture assisting folks during a tough time that gets into the TFAP program, the SNAP program, the WIC program, and things of that nature. So it's a combination of all this, and we're going to continue to work hard to find ways to bring costs down.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it, Mr. Secretary, and hopefully with this Supply Chain Disruption Task Force, we can see more information broadcast widely so our citizens know exactly how the administration is working with these problems. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Absolutely. Thank you. Excuse me, Senator Tuberville.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today. Mr. Secretary, Alabama's hardworking farmers and producers continue to face uphill battles as they work to feed our great nation. Constant roadblocks and government overreach are creating challenging environments for my constituents. Our producers continue to face skyrocketing input costs for fuel, seeds, equipment, fertilizer, combined with supply chain disruptions, shortages, and backlogs. Since President Biden took office in 2021, inflation has caused prices in Alabama to increase over 10%. In April, Alabamians were paying $478 more each month for everyday expenses. It is more expensive for everyone to feed their families, fuel their cars, power their homes. This is not sustainable. Today, gas prices in Alabama are $4.30 for regular gasoline, $5.36 for diesel. These prices are almost $1.50 more than this time last year. Secretary, I call on you to be a partner to help relieve the regulatory inflationary burdens on our farmers so they can do what they do best, feed the world. Now, as we seek to begin farm bill discussions in the coming months, it seems that the Biden administration is only focused on two areas of the comprehensive package: nutrition and conservation. While these farm bill titles are important, so are the traditional farm programs like crop insurance, farm commodity programs that help our producers safely manage risk. Also, we need to acknowledge and thank our farmers and foresters who have worked hard for generations, continue to work hard to voluntarily implement practices of sustainability and conservation on their land as they see fit. They are the first conservationists and best stewards of their land, knowing it must be preserved for generations to come. My first question, Mr. Secretary, is changes with the administration keep bringing newly written regulations surrounding the waters of the U.S. or the WOTUS. While I know the Department of Agriculture does not have direct role with WOTUS as compared to the EPA and the Corps of Engineers, your department clearly has direct engagements with landowners and our nation's natural resources. The Supreme Court plans to make a ruling surrounding WOTUS later this year. Do you commit to working with others in the Biden administration and our nation's farmers and foresters to uphold and implement the final decision from the Supreme Court in a timely, efficient fashion? And can you elaborate on that?
Sure. Senator, appreciate the question. We have a close relationship with EPA on this particular issue, wanting to make sure that as EPA promulgates and implements rules and regulations of any kind, including waters of the U.S., that it does so with farmer input. And we've encouraged Administrator Reagan, and I think he's been very true to his word. He is seeking, he is sitting down, he is listening, and he's making himself and his team available for farmer input. Our second responsibility, I think, is to take a look at, as the rules and regulations are implemented, how can USDA provide resources and assistance to enable farmers and ranchers to implement whatever the rule might be in the most efficient and effective way for them and for their operation. And we obviously will be committed to doing that.
Thank you. Between the publication of 2012 and 2017 Census of Agriculture report, 67,000 farms ceased operation. 67,000. And over 14 million acres of land went out of farming. What is your department doing to help protect and restore our nation's farmland and farmers?
Well, there are a couple things. I think first and foremost, we're trying to figure out ways in which we can expand on what I refer to as the extraction economy. Right now, Senator, essentially farmers have two ways to make money. They can sell their crops, or they can feed their crops to livestock and sell the product of the livestock. The reality is they need more revenue streams, and that's one of the reasons why the Climate Smart agricultural product initiative is so important, because it creates additional revenue streams for farmers. Also, converting agricultural waste into more bio-based products, another revenue stream. So increasing the number of revenue streams is one avenue. Second avenue is making sure that farmers have access to the information about programs that are available to them. So we're expanding significantly the technical assistance, particularly to historically underserved farmers, because they are the ones who are most struggling, and oftentimes are they're either not aware or unable to go through the process of applying for the various tools and various programs that we have to help them. So with these technical assistance grants that we're making to a number of organizations, we're now providing more assistance and more help so folks can get access to the programs. And then the final thing I would say is we obviously continue to look for ways in which we can help beginning farmers and ranchers get started, and focusing on a variety of folks, including veterans. So a number of things that we're doing.
Thank you. One last quick question. Are you familiar with the EQIP proposal to our farmers about cover crops?
Sure.
About the three. I'm having problems in my state. My farmers are asking me, why would we plant these three grains when we do wheat? We have cover crops, and we need more wheat. We need more things that we can sell. Do you have a?
We essentially have recently indicated, as part of this effort to try to expand production through our conservation agreements, that wheat would be essentially treated as a cover crop, an appropriate cover crop. So we've just recently announced that, Senator.
So that won't be a problem.
Shouldn't be.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Absolutely, thank you. Next is Senator Smith, and then Senator Grassley.
Great, thank you. Welcome to the committee, Secretary Vilsack. It's great to see you again, and I want to thank you for your visits to Minnesota. I understand you were at the Crookston campus to give a commencement speech recently, and we also appreciated you visiting us last August to talk about the drought we were experiencing, and also the visit to the rural hospital that you and I made together. So appreciate that. So you know Minnesota well, and you understand. I know that Minnesota is blessed because we have such a diverse agricultural economy, and in really all ways. Particularly, we have Hmong, Native, Latino, Somali, Indigenous, and Black farmers that all play a really important role in Minnesota's agricultural sector. And during your confirmation hearing, I asked you what you thought the USDA could do, both internally and externally, to break down some of the barriers facing farmers of color and business owners of color. I've asked this question of pretty much every nominee who's come before this committee. And the need, of course, is to address some of the systemic and historic challenges that the department has faced. And I know that you understand this. You and I have talked about it frequently. So I'm wondering if you could give us an update, give us a sense of how you have made equity and fairness a priority at the USDA, and tell us a little bit, give us some examples of the work that you've been doing.
Thank you, Senator. Internally, we've asked each of our mission areas to essentially establish a review of their programs with the use of an equity lens in everything that they do, and to put together a strategic plan to incorporate equity in all decision-making. Those plans have now been consolidated into a single department-wide plan, over 500 recommendations that are in the process of being implemented. Each mission area is going to have a chief diversity officer that will also be responsible for overseeing that operation and reporting to us results. But that's not enough to do an internal review. We also have to have an external review. And that external review is now being conducted by the Equity Commission that was formed as a result of the American Rescue Plan. We have individuals who are very serious thinkers who are taking a look at the systemic nature of our programs, and we expect and anticipate the beginnings of a set of recommendations on both the farm service programs and on the rural development programs during the course of this calendar year. And we will certainly look for ways to implement the Equity Commission recommendations to remove those systemic barriers. The third thing I would say is the reality is that many of those underserved populations simply either do not know about the USDA programs or unable to access the very detailed information that's necessary to apply for some of these programs, or frankly don't trust the USDA. And so in an effort to try to build a bridge and to build a better understanding and a connection to our programs and those folks who need our programs the most, we are in the process of using American Rescue Plan resources to essentially provide grants to organizations that have a trusting relationship with historically underserved producers, and creating an opportunity for those entities to help those individuals apply for and receive the benefits of programs. And we're excited about that opportunity. NRCS has also expanded on this by establishing another $50 million initiative. 108 organizations are now contracting with, including the Hmong population in Minnesota, in an effort to try to make sure that we're getting the technical information and assistance out there to everyone who needs the programs. That's a representative sampling. I could go on for a long time on this, but I don't want to use up all your time.
Well, I appreciate you putting into practice your pledge to make this a priority, and I'm glad to hear about the kind of what sounds to me like the sort of a navigator a strategy for connecting underserved communities to USDA programs, including, I hope, language translation services, which can be really helpful for a lot of Hmong farmers and other farmers. It sounds like we're working on that, so I very much appreciate that. Just in the short time I have left, there are many of us on this committee who have worked a lot on issues of market concentration. I suspect that my colleague, Senator Grassley, might bring this up next. I'm very happy to be supporting and working with Senator Grassley and Senator Fisher on the work that they're doing around market concentration and bringing more transparency there. The huge issue in Minnesota where farmers, especially beef producers, are making pennies on the dollar while the big processors are making a lot of money and everybody's paying more at the grocery store shelves. So my question is, could you just quickly address the opportunity for the USDA to do better and more research on the impacts of market concentration? The University of Minnesota's Food Protection and Defense Institute is doing some great work to understand better how the lack of competition in the packing sector is directly impacting producers. And I wonder if you could just talk briefly about what more the USDA could be doing there on research.
Part of what we announced as part of our package to provide assistance and help to expand processing capacity today is a study that was required by the President's competition order that speaks a bit to this issue. Secondly, our Office of Chief Economist's office is obviously engaged and involved in taking a look at the market and how concentration can potentially impact positively or negatively capacity and income. The fact that we had 263 applications for our $150 million, that almost $900 million in requests, $5 billion in projects, suggests that there is a real demand and need. And so I'm excited about the opportunity for us to use the resources that are available under the American Rescue Plan to begin creating more capacity and therefore more competition, which we think ultimately will lead to better prices. Obviously, the legislation that you all are working on, we look forward to when and if it's passed to be able to implement it in the way that you envision.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Senator Grassley.
First of all, I want to congratulate you on the announcements that you made about rules beefing up the Packages and Stockyards Act. I know that you're committed to that, the use of that act and the enforcement of that act. The first thing that I'm going to ask you about is pretty simple, whether or not what I'm going to describe to you was the USDA consulted in regard to this. 2 weeks ago, the Solicitor General filed a brief of whether or not the Supreme Court should take a case involving widely used pesticide. In Iowa, we call it Roundup, but the big classification is glyphosate.
In that brief, the Solicitor General flipped the government's long-held position that's been the position of the law since 1972, that FIFRA preempts state law, and then the Solicitor General argued even against the EPA authority that the law requires. Were you consulted on that in any way?
Senator, we weren't. We continue to work with the EPA in terms of crop protection programs or products in an effort to try to make sure that farmers and ranchers have what they need.
Yeah, and I think it's clear in the law that the EPA has this sole authority, and I think it's going to be a problem if the federal government or if the Supreme Court would not take this case because state law is trying to go beyond what the FIFRA law allows. Since let's just suppose that that they would take this case and they'd somehow say that this California law is a legitimate law. Is the USDA doing any analysis that removing these products like Roundup from the marketplace would do to grain, U.S. grain production? Because, you know, this seems to me that this has a big thing to do with the productivity of our American agriculture.
Senator, I'm not sure that I know the answer to that question. I'm more than happy to go back and ask our folks if they are in the process of reviewing that. We've obviously had a lot on our plate recently with global food security concerns, and that's been my focus. But I'd be more than happy to check with our folks and see whether or not they've done that. And depending upon the outcome of the case and depending upon the nature of the decision that may be forthcoming, we'll take a look at it.
I'd like to put in the record, Madam Chairman, a letter I wrote to the President on that subject.
Without objection.
Let me see. The next one is, have you, because of this possibility that we're going to run short of grain worldwide, not probably not in the United States, but worldwide, and increased U.S. production would have something to do with the shortage, mostly caused now because of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Has the USDA discussed opening up the conservation reserve program so that farmers can plant on those acres under these conditions that we have now?
Well, first of all, Senator, we announced the fact that in terms of the general sign-up, approximately a little over 1 million acres that was in the program is coming out of the program. So that 1 million acres is going to be available. Secondly, we announced an effort to try to encourage those whose acres are coming out of the program to be able to access their fields more quickly. As you know, they cannot, based on the rules, go into the fields and take active activities prior to October 1st. Well, we're basically suggesting that they can now voluntarily terminate without penalty for those roles that are now coming, or those acres that are now coming out of the program, so that they'd be in a position to do work now on that land, to either prepare it for a crop or to potentially even think about other crops that could be grown during the course of the winter. So we have looked for ways in which we can provide help and assistance.
My time's out. I may submit some questions for answer in writing on other subjects. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much. Senator Lujan and then Senator Marshall.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and Ranking Member. Secretary Vilsack, good to see you, sir. As you know, New Mexico is currently facing the largest fire in our state's history, having now burned over 311,000 acres and directly impacting farmers, ranchers, families, and rural communities across the state. I want to thank you and the United States Forest Service for the decision this week to pause all prescribed burns for 90 days while the department reviews the process, and also for the exemption that allows ranchers to be able to access U.S. forest lands where they have grazing permits. As you know, this was a prescribed burn, and recognizing that over 95%, 97% of prescribed burns don't result in this. I'm more interested in the 2% that do, because this has destroyed lives. Accessing grazing still remains a top concern with a lot of families in these communities, Secretary Vilsack. And so what I'm hoping is that I can have your commitment that you and the department will do all in your power to ensure ranchers in New Mexico have access to all available grazing and feed options, including allowing the emergency haying and grazing of land enrolled in CRP.
Senator, we'll be happy to work with you to make sure that we are responsive to the needs of your producers. It's a commitment that I make to you, and it's a commitment I made to your governor when we met last week. I think it was last week or the week before last. Very difficult situation. Totally understand the concerns and stress that you and the folks in New Mexico are feeling right now.
I appreciate it, Mr. Secretary. And the other area that I've been hearing from farmers is that they are being told they are not eligible for prevented plant payments this growing season because of changes to the crop insurance program made by the Trump administration. As farmers and ranchers across the West, and especially in New Mexico, continue to deal with historic drought and now wildfires, I find it very concerning that this vital risk management tool would remain unavailable to the producers who need it most. And so, Mr. Secretary, has the Biden administration examined the Trump administration's change to this program? And if so, why was the decision made to keep the change in place?
Senator, I think you're referring to preventive planning and the 1 in 4 rule. We have looked at it, and we actually have made changes in some areas for some commodities. I would say to you that our review is not finished. We need to continue to look for ways in which we can create flexibility for the very reason that you've addressed. So yes, changes have been made, and I suspect and anticipate that there will be additional changes forthcoming.
I appreciate that. Where there's a lot of rain and water, I can understand with what the goal was to try to phase a little bit of this out. But back west, where we don't have water, and now where families were devastated because of fire, if they were in 3 years of drought, the formula is kicking in. It's just a kick in the face. And so I appreciate the work you're doing in this space and look forward to working with you in there as well. The watersheds back in New Mexico, as you know, our water, for the most part, from small communities comes from watersheds up in the mountains. We depend on that snowpack, and we do our due diligence to keep it clean and keep it flowing and get it to the plant so we can get it to families. Now, small, historically underserved communities in New Mexico are not only continuing to combat active fires, but as monsoon season approaches, having to quickly pivot to examine the damage done to our watersheds. Concerns range from the cumbersome process of having to seek cost share assistance waivers to fix problems the federal government caused, to uncertainty related to administrative and technical assistance necessary to effectively deploy the resources once they are delivered. So, Mr. Secretary, do I have your commitment to work with me and fellow New Mexicans to ensure that our communities have your and the agency's full support to provide the necessary financial, technical, and administrative support to recover from these fires, namely in that water space?
Senator, you do.
Appreciate that. And will you direct all the offices under your jurisdiction to prioritize making the appropriate determination in a thorough and timely manner that allows aid to be released?
I think that's already been done, but I will continue to emphasize it.
I appreciate that. And the last question I have is around PFAS and dairy cattle. Because of all the challenges that have already occurred from being able to move forward from the previous administration who didn't want to do anything, I want to thank you for immediately taking this on as soon as you took office. But now there's a question over the formula and determining when a cow is going to get counts to get paid. Now, because of the reality, if you can explain to me how USDA came to the decision associated with the timing of payments for cattle versus when these cows were determined to be contaminated. It's a little different than, a healthy cow, I would say, or a healthy dairy cow. This is very different. And explain why the cow shouldn't be paid the rate the day the cows were deemed contaminated.
Senator, I appreciate the question. First of all, as you know, we inherited a rule that would not have allowed for a reimbursement for the value of the cow. And in fact, what was done was basically pay for the milk that was contaminated. And we continued to do that until we finally realized that really what we had to do was to actually pay for the cow. So dairies have received significant amount of resources, in some cases millions of dollars of resources, for the milk that was contaminated. We're using the livestock indemnity program structure, which basically provides for the way in which this the valuation is calculated. The difference between that and the livestock indemnity program is that instead of 75% of the value, we're awarding 100% of the value. And we also made a decision to allow for reimbursement of cattle even before the rule that were contaminated, even before the rule was in place. So we think we've taken 3 steps: providing compensation for the milk, 100% of the loss, as well as covering cows even that were contaminated before the rule was put into place, which we think is a fair and reasonable allocation of resources and fairness to the dairy industry in your state.
I appreciate that. Madam Chair, I see my time is more than expired. There's a few others that I'll submit into the record, but thank you. And Mr. Secretary, thank you for what you're doing. And please, everyone, pray for our state and the people with the fires that they're being impacted with. We need your help on this, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Very serious. Senator Marshall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, it's great, and we're honored to have you here in person for the first time this Congress. You mentioned in your written testimony that under President Biden's leadership, America is building back better. Mr. Secretary, I'm here to fight for American agriculture, for Kansas farmers. As you know, farmers and ranchers are facing record inflation. Fertilizer prices have quadrupled. The price of diesel has doubled. Farmers can't find inputs, pesticide inputs. They can't find tractor parts. And many farmers feel that these supply chain issues have been exacerbated by President Biden's policies. Parents can't find baby formulas. The hope for new ag trade deals is bleak. We don't have a USTR for ag nominee. The EPA continues to push non-science-based decisions that eliminate pesticide tools that help produce higher yields but yet decrease their carbon footprint. Based upon your written statement, I don't know which producers you're talking to, but they're not producers I've been seeing in Kansas. You've been Secretary of Agriculture now for almost 10 years on and off. We expect you to be a loud voice, a voice for farmers, for our agriculture producers in the White House. I want to follow up with Senator Grassley's comment about the U.S. Solicitor General's statement on federal presumption of pesticide labels, emphasizing that glyphosate is used in roughly 40% of acreage. It troubles me. I think you said you weren't consulted on this issue. We expect you to be proactive. Did you not speak to the president of the EPA about this? Are you not urging them? Do they not understand how important these pesticides are to decrease the carbon footprint and increase the production of our land? Again, you've been doing this for 10 years. We expected a loud voice. Or maybe you agree with the administration. Maybe you agree with the EPA.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what the question is.
Yeah,
Senator?
Why aren't you a louder voice? Why aren't you being proactive? It troubles me that you're not willing to speak up for American agriculture with this administration and push back on the EPA, to push back on the White House's policies when it's in regards to this glyphosate.
Well, Senator, in fairness, let's take a look at the record. You mentioned exports and trade. We've had a record export year.
Can you speak to my question? Can you answer my question? Are you pushing back on the glyphosate issue?
Well, I've actually talked to the EPA about protective crop protection and encourage the EPA to continue to follow the science. That is what American agriculture is asking.
You just testified to Senator Grassley that you weren't consulted, but now you're saying you were being proactive. I was
consulted, and basically I have talked to the EPA about crop protection activities and products, and encourage the EPA to continue to follow the science and encourage them to listen to farmers and the farmers' concerns. And frankly, they have. And so, with all due respect, I am representing farmers. We're representing farmers on things like E15. We're representing farmers on record trade. We're representing farmers on climate-smart agriculture and providing resources. We're representing farmers in terms of disaster assistance. $6 billion of pandemic assistance came out from this department.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I want to go on to my next question. I want to talk about fertilizers just for a second. As you know, nitrogen-based fertilizers are dependent upon natural gas as a substrate as well as to heat the process up. natural gas has doubled, nitrogen-based fertilizers have quadrupled. One of the things we could do is to maybe decrease some of the tariffs on fertilizers coming into this country. Have you spoken out as a strong voice for agriculture to the president as well as ITC chair about maybe decreasing those tariffs? This administration has done a really incredible job, I guess you would say, of decreasing tariffs on solar panels. What are we doing to help lower the tariffs on fertilizers?
We've talked about that issue. We've also pushed back on export bans that have exacerbated the problem. I've been very vocal about that. We've created alternative risk management tools for farmers to be able to reduce the amount of nitrogen fertilizer that they need and be able to be compensated for the crops that they may not be able to produce. We've talked about conservation programs in terms of precision agriculture.
I need to get one more question in here if I can. 30/30 is a big issue back home. When we spoke to you before, your plan was more CRP, but now we're talking about taking CRP out of the program. How do you balance those goals of this administration? What does that look like going forward to you?
Trust in the farmers. Farmers are basically speaking to us in terms of what their needs are. We're seeing an expansion of conservation practices with EQIP and CSP and the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, the Climate Smart Agriculture Product.
But previously you said your plan for the 30 program was more CRP, but it looks like more CRP is going to come out. So how do you get to your goal of 30/30?
The 30/30 goal, Senator, includes conservation programs. It isn't just simply CRP. I would also point out to you that we are making an effort in terms of grasslands. We're seeing an increased activity in terms of CRP on grasslands. Farmers, however, we trust farmers to make the right choice and set of decisions for their operation. This year, they're taking roughly net 1 million acres out of the program and putting it into production. That's their choice. That's their decision. We respect that. In the meantime, we're looking for ways in which we can provide more resources from conservation programs, EQIP, CSP, RCPP, the Climate Smart Agriculture Initiatives. All of that is a significant amount of investment in conservation programs, all of which falls within the rubric of the voluntary, farmer-led 30 by 30 effort.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Senator Klobuchar virtually, and then Senator Fisher. And I will say that one of 2 votes that we will be having has begun, but I believe we will be able to get through all of our members wanting to ask questions before the first vote is completed. So, Senator Klobuchar, welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Chairwoman, for your great work. And Secretary, it's so good to see you again. I wanted to reiterate what I told you in person, just the fantastic work the USDA has done with regard to avian flu. It's finally going down. I described it to the people in my state that the waterfowl were taking too long of a spring break in our state, hanging out before flying north, and we had a real outbreak, and your people working with our state were just fantastic, and we're in a better place than we were a while ago, so I want to thank you for that. I want to focus a little on ag disaster aid. I know you know about these 2 separate storm systems that passed through Minnesota with heavy rains recently on May 11th and 12th, tornadoes, destroying barns and grain bins, flooded fields, left several rural communities without power. Our FSA executive director has requested disaster designations for 62 countings. And so do you have a timeline for reviewing that request? I led a letter this week with the Minnesota delegation supporting the request and hoping you can look at it quickly.
Be happy to, Senator. And we'll try to get that approved as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up, lake planning flexibility. I know that Senator Hoeven raised this with you. It's really along the same lines because the storms have created significant challenges for farmers who are already behind on spring planting. In Minnesota, completed planting for corn at 60%, soybeans 32%, wheat 11%, sugar beets 27% are all significantly behind our 5-year average. And so hoping that you will review the suggestions that Senator Hoeven and I have made and work with us to provide certainty and support to our farmers during this time of delay.
We will certainly take a look at the correspondence we received yesterday and make a decision as quickly as we can.
Okay, thank you very much. And I also want to thank you for all your work on that, on climate change. As we know, part of what we're seeing, it's not just serendipity that this is going on, these strange weather events. It's exactly what was predicted. And of course, in the area of ag, that means everything from conservation to cover crops on. And I want to thank you for that. I thought I would end here by focusing on some supply chain issues with ocean shipping. We have seen vulnerabilities for U.S. exporters, including our ag exporters, who've seen the price of shipping containers increase fourfold. Senator Thune and I passed our Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022 through the Senate. The House has a similar version led by Representative Garamendi and Johnson, and it looks like we're going to be able to reach some agreement so that our goods are actually taken by these international shipping conglomerates and that we get some fair prices by some rules that we're going to push through with the Maritime Commission. Can you talk about the impact of shipping container disruptions on, particularly on ag exports, and whether or not you think cracking down on some of these international shipping conglomerates' rates and practices would be helpful?
Well, I had an opportunity yesterday to speak to 4 of the major shippers about this very issue, asking them to create and provide greater consistency in terms of access to containers and the ability of empty containers that currently leave our ports to be filled with agricultural exports. Received commitments from all 4 of them to basically take a look at doing a better job. This has been a difficult challenge for American agriculture. We've seen some improvement recently by virtue of the resources that we put in play to create a pop-up site in Oakland. We've also provided incentives to move empty containers, financial incentives. We also recently opened up another pop-up opportunity in Seattle. So we're going to continue to work on this, and obviously I think the legislation that's going through the process is sending a strong message that we're not satisfied. We're frustrated with the progress up to this point.
Thank you. And just quick last, can you talk about the biofuel infrastructure investments that USDA has made? We're continuing to push on some of these issues, and I know you are an ally.
Well, we anticipate in the very near future announcing the availability of another $100 million to expand access to pumping systems and distribution systems that would allow for E15 and B20 to be more readily available. So that's going to continue.
Okay. Thank you so much, Secretary.
Thank you very much. All right. Next we have Senator Thune, then Senator Warnock, Senator Fisher, Senator Booker, and then Senator Highsmith. Senator Thune.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, welcome. Nice to have you here. And I appreciate the committee turning its focus to the challenges that our farmers and ranchers and rural communities are facing among those high inflation, rising food and energy costs, commodity market volatility, and supply chain constraints, I think all of which have been referenced at some level today, coming at a time when producers are working to ramp up production to address global food shortage concerns. We got in South Dakota, I think, as you know, producers who are dealing with difficult weather conditions this spring, including, depending on where you are in the state, drought, severe drought, excess moisture, and significant storm damage. And I would urge the USDA to provide expedited assistance to those affected producers. Mr. Secretary, many of the commodity prices are high. Inflation has sent farm production expenses skyrocketing. As a result, net farm income is expected to decline this year. And to make matters worse, some producers in my state recently had significant weather-related storm damage to their property, including farm equipment, buildings, and grain bins. And so there's a deep concern about replacing these critical elements of their operations and how expensive it will be given the soaring costs that we are experiencing. What is USDA doing to address inflation and its effect on agriculture, and what can USDA do to help producers mitigate the sharply increasing costs of these weather-related damage repairs?
Well, I would say, Senator, that our primary focus is trying to make sure that the disaster assistance programs that are in place that have been funded and financed by Congress are made available as quickly as possible. An example of that is the emergency, the WIP Plus program that folks refer to. We basically redesigned the way in which that program will operate so we could get resources out to farmers as quickly as possible, making it much easier and much simpler for them to apply for those resources. That's going to continue. We haven't been hesitant in terms of getting pandemic assistance out, over $6 billion of resources provided. We'll continue to look for ways in which we can utilize the livestock forage program and the livestock indemnity program, the crop insurance, NAP, all of those programs to basically make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to provide assistance and help. In terms of some of the challenges, the fertilizer issue, I think there is an opportunity here for us to begin the process of being more self-reliant when it comes to the ingredients that go into fertilizer, which is why the $500 million is going to be allocated. We think there's going to be great interest in that effort, which we hope to be able to launch this summer. We think there's an opportunity for us to use the conservation programs effectively and efficiently to advance precision agriculture that will help to reduce costs. We think there's research that's suggesting that perhaps some of our acres are potentially over-fertilized, and to the extent that we can give farmers that information, they can make more informed decisions about their operation. So there's a wide variety of things that we're attempting to do.
Well, and a lot of those programs you mentioned are programs in previous farm bills that I and others have been involved in creating, and hopefully they will work effectively in times when we really need them, like right now. I want to hit on the Black Hills National Forests and other forests, which provide recreation opportunities and contribute significantly to local and regional economies. In the last few years, we've seen enormous wildfires across the West. Those fires were in many cases devastating to local communities and have lasting effects on water quality, wildlife, recreation, and tourism. Proper forest management is as important now as it has ever been, and it plays a critical role in maintaining forest health and reducing the threat of catastrophic fires. In the Black Hills, the forest products industry has been a reliable partner in the proper management of the forest. Fortunately, last year we had a sawmill in the Black Hills that closed due to a lack of timber availability, and I'm concerned that more mill closures could be imminent if the Forest Service doesn't take action to maintain the forest timber sale program. Numerous concerns have been raised with the Forest Service's publication of a general technical report on the forest timber sale program and the agency's failure to uphold its commitment to work collaboratively with industry and state and local officials through consideration of the science-based recommendations from the formal Black Hills National Forest Advisory Board and state foresters. Following the GTR, we've seen a drastic reduction in timber sales and loss of milling infrastructure that's critical in meeting the goals outlined in the Forest Service 10-year wildlife reduction strategy. So what steps are you taking to make sure the Forest Service upholds its commitment to collaborate and to avoid additional mill closures?
Well, one thing we've done, Senator, is to establish a NEPA strike team directed to the Black Hills to make sure that we are determining the appropriate volume estimates for the next 3 years. We also have a national team working on a timber pilot transfer program, basically bringing in potential timber from the West for processing in South Dakota. And as you know, you've asked, not you, the folks have asked for a reconsideration of the GTR report, and we are in the process of completing that reconsideration. I expect to anticipate decisions on that in June.
Yeah, you're right. We have asked for that, Phil. Thank you. Madam Chair, my time's expired. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Senator Warnock.
Thank you so very much, Chair Stabenow. Mr. Secretary, before I start with my questions about farmers in Georgia, I want to ask a brief question about the baby formula crisis facing Georgia families. My question is simple. From USDA's perspective, when will families in Georgia who are searching for formula start to see more products on the shelves?
Senator, our hope and belief is that we're beginning the process of turning the corner on this. Announced earlier yesterday, or today rather, the opportunity for Gerber and Nestle and Mead & Johnson to basically be able to have the ability to work with state health commissioners to provide greater flexibility to substitute product, whether it's contract brand product, whether it's unauthorized contract brand product, or whether it's a competitor's brand, to be able to access and expand in the WIC program more product. As you well know, we're also bringing more product in from overseas through a series of flights that are currently being financed in part by USDA. We had one in Indianapolis over the weekend, which I attended. Yesterday there was one in Dulles. We also have been working with encouraging the FDA to continue to work with providers who have not yet been authorized to do business in this country to be able to expand the capacity of imports. All of that, I think, together with bringing the Sturgis plant back online, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we should begin to see some progress on this, and hopefully over the course of several weeks, we'll see more product on the shelf.
Okay. So in the next couple of weeks, they'll start to see more product. And
next couple of weeks now, it's not going to solve the problem. There's still going to be issues.
Right.
There's still going to be areas where there's going to be challenges. There's still going to be places where people are going to have to use the social media and the networks that they've created to try to identify where product is and be able to make sure that that product gets delivered where it needs to be. But I think we're going to begin to see some progress on this, and hopefully, as the spring and summer wears on, that we're in a much different circumstance. The Sturgis plant's important. The imports are important. The ability to substitute product in the WIC program is important. All of those are.
Thank you. Obviously, for folks who are trying to feed their children, it can't come soon enough.
Understand.
And thank you for traveling with me to Georgia earlier this year to hear directly from farmers who've been left behind by the USDA. Those farmers spoke to the two of us about the need for urgent debt relief, which I remain committed to delivering. They also spoke of the need for USDA to do more to support farmers who have faced historic discrimination and to protect them from adverse actions. I appreciate that the USDA responded to my call to suspend past due debt collections and foreclosures for these farmers, but many farmers who stopped making payments because Congress promised them relief are now considered delinquent through no fault of their own. It is estimated that over 24,000 borrowers have deferred payments or are currently considered economically distressed. What's the plan, Secretary Vilsack? What are you going to do to ensure these farmers are not forced out of their business or off of their land?
Well, currently, there is no capacity to force them off the land. There's no ability to foreclose. We've basically got a moratorium in terms of adverse actions for farmers, number one. Number two, we continue to obviously go through the courts process on the 12 cases that are pending against Section 1005 of the American Rescue Plan, and we'll continue to vigorously support and defend that action by Congress. There are ways in which the definition of those who are able to get debt relief could be adjusted by Congress, and we've suggested, we've provided technical assistance on how that might happen.
So the farmers I'm hearing from in Georgia who are very worried about being forced off their land, you're saying there's no need for them to worry?
There's no need for them to worry at this point in time. And then finally, I would say we also are encouraging folks to take a look at, in the long term, there's an opportunity for loan servicing. Depending upon how all of this shakes out, depending upon what the courts ultimately decide, depending upon what Congress can or cannot do relative to the definition of those who are covered for debt relief, depending upon the ability, our ability at USDA to provide help and assistance, there's also debt servicing opportunities, ways in which we can help farmers stay on the land, and that's the goal.
One other question. I know I'm running out of time here, Madam Chair, but I sent a letter on December 10th raising the concerns of farmers who are concerned about the lack of transparency at the USDA. It took 3 months for me to get a response, and I'm still very concerned about the department's outreach and engagement plan for these farmers. These farmers often hear about funding opportunities well past the application deadline, or when a funding announcement is made, they feel consistently left out. Secretary Vilsack, your response to my letter acknowledged that USDA still has work to do here, and I appreciate that acknowledgement. But what will USDA do differently to address systemic discrimination, and specifically how have you improved outreach and engagement to historically underserved farmers since our visit?
The first thing that we did is to take resources from the American Rescue Plan and invest them with community building organizations that are trusted by those producers. To be able to provide the technical assistance, the information about the programs, and the ability to work with those producers to be able to successfully access the programs. Sometimes it can be difficult and complex to be able to get into our programs. And the reality is, I think with technical assistance, we're going to see more participation. That's the first thing. Now, that was 20 organizations received $75 million to provide that level of assistance over the course of the next couple of years. We also recognize that there are smaller organizations that deal with smaller groups of these disadvantaged and historically underserved producers. And so we are also putting on, there's currently a minimum of $25 million available under the American Rescue Plan for agreements with those organizations as well. The NRCS has an additional $50 million, which they allocated to 108 organizations to expand outreach. That's the first thing. The second thing is each mission area of USDA has put together an equity plan in an effort to try to create an equity lens for everything we do. They've come up with over 500 recommendations. Each mission area is going to have a chief diversity officer. This is really important, Madam Chair.
I realize that, absolutely.
And also the Equity Commission. The Equity Commission is an outside look at trying to reduce systemic barriers, and we expect and anticipate recommendations coming from the Equity Commission sometime this summer. There's a lot more I could say, but time.
This is very, very important, and we certainly want to follow up with that. And I'm only we have 4 members. There's a vote open and 4 members who have been patiently waiting as well. So I just want to make sure everybody gets a chance to ask questions. And
thank you for your notice, Madam Chair.
Absolutely, and obviously this is critically important, and we're going to follow up together on this. So thank you very much, Senator Fisher, and then Senator Booker.
And I've appreciated the more than 40 hours of technical assistance that you and your staff at USDA have provided on that legislation. This bipartisan legislation is co-sponsored by half the members of this committee. Our legislation is focused on 2 main policies: price discovery and transparency in the market. Do you agree that a robust, competitive, negotiated market is essential to ensuring price discovery takes place in the cattle market? Some folks have expressed concern about this, so briefly, can you reassure us that when implementing the bill, USDA would conduct a notice and comment rulemaking and a cost-benefit analysis when setting the regional minimums as explicitly required by the legislation?
We will follow whatever Congress directs us to do.
Thank you. At our legislative hearing exactly 1 month ago, USDA officials testified that our bill would make the cattle markets more competitive, transparent, and fair. Do you agree with that statement?
I do, and I think it's important as well for us to increase capacity, to have more competition as well. I think there's a combination of both legislation and increasing capacity.
Okay, thank you. International trade is critical for my state's economy. We exported $7.1 billion in agricultural products in 2020. I've heard continuously from Nebraska's ag producers who are frustrated about the lack of a trade agenda from this administration. We have seen no push from the administration to work with Congress on trade promotion authority. We've seen no push for the administration to pursue new agreements that provide market access. That is true just this week with the announced Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. And we have seen no push to name a qualified nominee to be USTR's chief ag negotiator. With that said, I would like to ask about a specific trade issue impacting Nebraska corn growers. I have concern over Mexico's policy on ag biotechnology, which is set to ban biotech corn for human consumption as soon as January 2024. This policy is out of step with their commitments under USMCA. It will restrict Nebraskans' access to innovative agricultural tools and increase costs for consumers on both sides of the border, something we don't need with current out-of-control inflation. Mexico is the top export destination for Nebraska's corn. We're a top producer of white corn, used in corn chips, tortillas, and other food products. Planting decisions will begin soon for the 2023 corn crop that will be exported in 2024. That means that Nebraska farmers need certainty from this important trading partner right now. So, Secretary Vilsack, how is the administration working with Mexico to ensure continued market access, in particular for white corn used in food products? Is the administration prepared to use all relevant bilateral and multilateral policy mechanisms at its disposal, including dispute resolution, if Mexico does not make any progress in fulfilling its commitments under USMCA?
I recently had a conversation directly with the President of Mexico about this issue of corn, and I'm confident that exports of corn that your farmers and farmers across the country are relying on are going to continue. We'll continue to work with our trading partner. The fact is we've finally got potatoes across the border after 15 years, and I think we're going to continue to focus on developing a strong, confident relationship with the Mexicans, and I'm confident that that's going to result in us continuing to have very, very strong exports with Mexico.
Thank you, and I hope you will be able to use the tools at your disposal with current trade agreements in order to be stern and resolute with Mexico on this white corn.
We haven't shown a reluctance to do that with our Canadian friends on dairy, so.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Senator Booker.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and Ranking Member. Mr. Secretary, we've talked a lot about the terrible history of discrimination amongst black farmers. And we know that discrimination within the USDA farm assistance and lending programs cause black farmers to lose millions of acres of farmlands and rob farmers of their families of hundreds of billions of dollars of intergenerational wealth that land really represented. We know that one of the main sources of the USDA discrimination against black farmers historically and still today is discrimination in the county committee system. Can you talk about the actions you've taken or do you intend to take to root out and bring to an end, finally, the discrimination in the USDA county committee system?
Senator, the thing I can do is to make sure that there's minority representation on all those county committees. When I was secretary before, I exercised that power for the first time ever to make sure that in 300 counties where there were not minority representation, that we had a minority representative. The Equity Commission that I alluded to earlier is in the process of taking a look at all of the issues, and I know that county committees is one of the areas that they're looking at, and I'm encouraged and I'm hopeful that they'll make a set of recommendations relative to the county committee structure that we can then utilize as a basis for going forward. But in the meantime, we'll make sure that there's minority representation on every one of those county committees.
And so you're waiting for your strategy to come from the commission that you've created?
Well, I think it's important. We've asked them to take a look at the systemic barriers that have existed and make a set of recommendations concerning, well, it's actually, the Equity Commission was a result of the American Rescue Plan. You all basically directed us to put this Equity Commission together. So in respecting the serious thinkers that are on that committee, I'm looking forward to their recommendations. We started first with FPAC. We started first with the Farm Service Agency review because we knew that was the area of most concern. And we're looking forward to the recommendations that they'll make.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Recent Inspector General report found that in 2019, the average time for a civil rights complaint to be processed by the USDA was 799 days. Justice delayed is justice denied. What steps are you taking to address this issue?
It's been cut in half since we took back control of the Civil Rights Office, Senator. We are focused. I get a report on this every month. We are seeing more timely investigations, more timely reviews, and more timely decision-making at the Office of Civil Rights. Very, very concerned about this, and we actually have seen that cut in half.
Could your staff reach out to mine and just let us know
Sure.
a little bit deeper in the things that you're doing?
You bet.
I appreciate your attention, and I appreciate that. We know that the Amazon rainforest is being burned down primarily for animal grazing and beef that's being produced out of Brazil. Big companies like JBS then take that meat, ship it into the United States, and repackage it here, and then sell it in our stores labeled as product of the USA. That's outrageous. And it's a fraudulent practice that hurts our consumers, hurts ranchers here in the United States. Product of the USA label claims should only be allowed on meat that comes from animals that were born, raised, and slaughtered in the United States. A petition, I think you know, has been pending at the USDA for 4 years, asking for the USDA to look into the issue. What do you anticipate, when do you anticipate taking action on this?
We are in the process of conducting a rather extensive survey, Senator, on this very issue. We're asking consumers across the United States 2 questions, essentially. What do you think this means when you see product of the U.S.? What do you think this means? And do you place value on it? That would basically form the basis for us to be able to utilize the power that we have to avoid misrepresentation and deception in labeling, and to make sure that the standard for use of that label on a voluntary basis is consistent with what people's expectations are. So I would anticipate and expect, hopefully, sometime this fall, we will have the results of the survey, and from that we'll then begin to look at how we might be able to strengthen significantly the product of the U.S.
Thank you. And again, I would really appreciate you keeping in touch with my team on this as well. Finally, the last question. I know the USDA is working on a new proposed rule on organic livestock and poultry standards that will clarify outdoor access requirements for organic livestock. Organic farms with high animal welfare standards in New Jersey and around the country have been waiting a long time for this rule, and they're being hurt by competitors with animal welfare standards that are lower than the public expects from an organic product. In the final rule that you released during the Obama administration in 2017, the implementation period for egg producers was 5 years. I assume that the new rule, coming more than 4 years later, will take effect very quickly, much more so. When do you anticipate the new rule will be released, and can you confirm that this rule will have a very short phase-in period?
Senator, we want to make sure that whatever we do is able to withstand legal challenge, and so that's going into the process. It's currently at OMB, and obviously it's not finalized until it gets through the process. Our hope is that it gets done sometime this summer. In terms of the time, I think we are looking at making sure that we are structuring it in a way that is the most defensible from a legal standpoint. And I honestly, as I'm sitting here, I don't remember what the timeline is, but I know that it is a timeline that we think is more defensible.
And you'll follow up with us on that as well?
Sure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Senator Highsmith.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today. And I certainly appreciate your willingness to serve and enjoyed our relationship when I was Commissioner of Agriculture in Mississippi. But I want to talk about poultry production in Mississippi and processing in Mississippi because it supports thousands of jobs and generates billions in economic output annually. It consistently ranks at the top of Mississippi's diverse list of agricultural commodities nationwide, number 6 nationwide. But it is my understanding that today, this morning, USDA announced a proposed rule titled Poultry Growing Tournament Systems, Fairness and Related Concerns. And I haven't read all 150-something pages of it yet, but the industry stakeholders in Mississippi, they've been quick to share their concerns with me over this. My question is concerning the poultry growing tournament systems, fairness and related concerns. Is it possible that what USDA is proposing could push billions in additional cost onto poultry companies at a time of record inflation and sky-high input cost, which would further threaten food security and raise food cost?
Senator, that's surprising to me because what we're asking the integrators to do is to provide information to producers before they sign a contract on flocks, on density, on the expectation from previous tournaments, what the farmer could potentially expect in terms of a return, the ability to share that information with their financial advisor. We're asking them to give information concerning the stock that they're providing, the age, the gender, the facility where it was raised. I don't think that you're talking about a significant increase in expense to integrators, but what you are providing is greater transparency and more information so as farmers make that decision to incur debt, to go into a contract, that they have a sense that they're actually going to be able to pay that debt off. Now, we did ask a series of questions as part of this, And it may be very well be that what you're reacting to are the questions that we're asking in terms of whether or not the system as it's operating is fair. And that's why we're asking the questions. We want to get input from people.
Okay, and we're still, like I said, trying to fully assess and understand these rules because it's my understanding today's rule is the first of 3.
That's correct. That's correct.
But the concern is, could it end up costing farmers and companies and American consumers? And is USDA planning to conduct a thorough economic analysis on the tournament rule, system rule, or other Packers and Stockyards Acts rules pertaining to the poultry industry?
We've done an analysis of this particular rule that we've announced today, and believe that the benefits far outweigh the costs. And we will continue to do that because it's obviously part of the regulatory process.
Okay, and I have a moment left that I want to switch to glyphosate. As you know, glyphosate is a widely used, proven, safe herbicide that combats weeds and grasses that threaten agriculture productivity. And I certainly remember when it came on the market in the form of Roundup. The U.S. Department of Justice recently took a new unprecedented position on glyphosate that could cripple the effective use of this very important ag product that we count on. If our farmers cannot use safe, common sense, and effective products, what would happen to U.S. crop yields if we had to go back to till instead of no-till?
Well, I think there are I think it would obviously impact and affect production. I think it would obviously impact and affect our ability to deal with climate. One of the strategies for dealing with climate is obviously no-till activities. So that, this is a personal injury case that they're involved with, and I don't, as I said earlier, I don't know precisely the reasoning and the rationale behind the Solicitor General's decision, but I would say that we've been very clear with the EPA in our conversations about these crop protection tools that we have to follow the science. Whatever the science says, that's what we should follow.
And is it your opinion that it could have an impact on domestic food prices?
Well, there are a lot of things that go into food prices. The reality is that farmers, unfortunately, as you well know from your days as commissioner, get so little of the food dollar. Roughly 16 cents of every food dollar. I'm not sure that it necessarily results in food cost increases in the same way that we're seeing with some of the supply chain challenges, but it may have an impact on it.
And what might the long-term impact be on our ongoing challenge to meet the growing global demand for food?
Well, the challenge would be for American agriculture to innovate. And what we have to do is we have to continue to look for ways in which we can invest in and encourage additional research and development on a wide variety of initiatives, including crop protection. We need to continue to work with our industry to make sure that innovation that we invest in innovation.
And on that note, Senator, I'm going to thank Senator Vilsack. They're calling us on the floor because if we're going to make this vote, we're going to have to go now. So